Nearly a year ago, we packed up our suitcases and moved from Palermo to Salerno. It was a really, really big decision and one that at points felt quite bittersweet. But 12 months later, do we have any regrets? And more importantly, what did we learn over the past year from that entire experience? I'm no stranger to moving home here in Italy. I've been living here for nearly 8 years and I've moved home 5 times in that period. However, there was something about that move from Palermo to Salerno that I honestly think was one of the most definitive moments in my life here in Italy to date. And today I'm going to be breaking down key lessons that the past 12 months have taught me since we made that move and how you can apply those lessons to your experience, whether you are planning a move to Italy or you are already here setting up your life. Because the first thing that this entire experience has taught me is that nothing changes if nothing changes. This was my mantra for 2025. And honestly, I leaned into it so much last year because our life in Palermo wasn't easy, primarily due to my boyfriend's work situation. And so we spent 2.5 years in various degrees of struggle. And so looking back now at that moment, because I actually rewatched a video that I had filmed which documented the behind the scenes of my move. And this was a video that was initially available to my Espresso Club members when I had the channel membership on YouTube. And I rewatched it the other day. And although it made me emotional because I still remember how I felt in that video, I have to be honest with you and say that there wasn't an ounce of regret, because I know, looking back at how our life was then, that had we stayed today, I don't think our life would have looked any different. Because something you have to know about Palermo and also about Sicily in general is that life there moves differently. And as much as it is so often romanticized, for the food and the weather and the people and all of the good stuff, because honestly, it's beautiful. I love Sicily and I do love Palermo. It's not easy to live there full time and to navigate things like work situations and just stuff like that, everyday things. And so when I look back at our life and our experiences and consider my boyfriend comes from Palermo, so we're not looking at this from kind of an outsider's perspective, we're looking at it from somebody who grew up in that city. It's interesting because I realized just how difficult life can be there. And so if we had stayed, I really don't think our life would have looked any different. And so you have to make changes sometimes. And this ties into the second lesson really, because I truly believe that change can be a beautiful thing, but it is your perspective of change that decides whether it is or not. Because essentially a lot of people resist change, and we could have done so as well. We could have looked at our life in Palermo, looked at how much money we'd invested into the move, looked at why we were there in the first place, to be closer to my boyfriend's friends and family, and kind of looked at the location and kind of got all romantic with it. But essentially, we had to be practical as well. And we had to look at the possibilities, because as I've touched on in other videos and also in a recent Instagram post, Italy is beautiful, but beauty does not pay the bills. And trust me, when you're living in a place that's picturesque and perfect, but you are struggling to pay for the things that you need to pay for, that shine quickly wears off. And so I really and truly believed that change was the right thing for us. And I honestly look back at my life now and think, yeah, you were correct, Claire, because change is a beautiful thing if you're focused on the possibilities and opportunities it can bring. Where people get it twisted is that they often focus on the discomfort surrounding change, the fact that there might be degrees of stress surrounding it, uncertainty, unanswered questions, doubts, anxiety, whatever it may be connected to that change. And when you're looking at change from that perspective, of course, it's never going to be something that you associate with good things. But if you're able to look at it from the other side and you're able to realize just what could come on the back of making changes, you start to realize that actually it can be super beautiful. When I look at our life now and I see how my boyfriend has progressed so much in the past 12 months in his career, I think, wow, if we'd never made that change, we would have stayed stuck in a moment that just wasn't easy for the both of us. So change is beautiful, but it does depend on your perspective. If you're not able to see the beauty in change, then it's probably going to be one of the most difficult things that you've experienced. So What I would say about these two lessons is that if you are contemplating a change in your life, please know that you have to make the change in order to see the difference, because nothing changes if nothing changes. But also know that you've got to understand what your mindset and attitude to that change really is. If you're thinking of moving to Italy, if you're thinking of changing your life within Italy, whatever stage or situation you are in, just know that your perspective of change is going to be what makes that experience be beneficial for you, or that experience be one of the worst decisions you've made. So you've just got to decide whereabouts you sit with that. We need to have a chat, because I've just realized, looking at my analytics, that 80% of the people who watch my content are not subscribed to this channel. Now, I get it, because the algorithm might serve you the same videos if they know that you like them week upon week, and you might not even realize that. But if you are one of those 80% who are not subscribed to my channel, I would absolutely love it if you would hit subscribe and show me some support, because it helps me to reach the people who need to hear the messages that I have to say about setting up a thriving life in Italy. Back to the video. The third key lesson that the past 12 months have really taught me is that life in Italy is a series of chapters or seasons. It's not the final destination. Now, I think when people decide to live in Italy and move abroad, I understand why it feels more comfortable to say that you've chosen a location and that's where you're going to live and stay. Because moving at the best of times is stressful, it costs a lot of money, there's a lot of upheaval, but especially when you're changing countries as well. But as I've said at the beginning of this video, I have moved 5 times in nearly 8 years. And when I reflect back on all of those places I've lived in to date, they were perfect for me in that season of my life and that chapter of my life. I really believe that every experience you go through teaches you something. All of those moves that I have gone through in nearly 8 years have taught me something and have made me far more educated about what it takes to rent property here, what it takes to be recommended to people here to rent places, and how it can be when you don't know anyone and you're renting it completely cold. I have learnt what is involved in terms of bureaucracy and just the different experiences I've had in the different homes that we've lived in, to mean that I can then help other people. If I had moved here and for the past nearly 8 years stayed in the same home, I wouldn't have that experience and I wouldn't have that knowledge. So I really think that those seasons and those chapters of your life help you to grow as a person and help you to evolve in whichever capacity it may be for you. But I don't think that you should move here and think that that place you've moved to is going to be your forever home. Some cases it might be, because if you decide to move somewhere where you've got family or you've got existing connections, then chances are you probably will stay in that location. But if you're moving somewhere and you don't know anyone here, this is why I always say you should rent here first before you consider buying, because you might decide that a particular location works for you now, but then a couple of years later, you might be ready to try something new, and you have the flexibility when you're renting to do that more so than if you buy somewhere. So I just think that looking at your life in Italy like this can really help. And if you're planning a move to Italy, thinking of an initial location as your starting destination can be a really nice way to take the pressure off, because you're not fixed there. If you don't like it, if it's not the place for you, if you arrive at a point where you think you've seen all that you can in that place, then you're free to move elsewhere. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves in finding the perfect destination, but Italy is not that. Italy is a journey that you go on from the moment you step foot in this country, both physically and emotionally. And so you just have to understand you're taking the first step in that journey, but it's not necessarily going to be the only step that you take when you start living here. The past 12 months have also shown me that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And this has been really interesting, because when I think back to all the people that we still know in Palermo, our friends, family members, and I see that, they have made a life for themselves there and they're happy. It could be very easy for us to sit here now and be like, well, why couldn't we have had some of that luck and happiness and been able to build our life there? But you see, what works for one person doesn't work for another. People live their lives in accordance to what works for them, their priorities, the lifestyle that they choose to have, and, the type of work that they do as well can depend on where somebody lives. For us and the life that we had and the type of work my boyfriend does, it just wasn't possible for us to really build something with stability in Palermo. And so it didn't work for us to remain. And I think, we are also good as humans at doing that whole comparison game and pitting ourselves against other people. A, without ever really knowing the full facts about a person's situation, but B, sometimes pitting ourselves against people, especially when it comes to social media a little bit as well, that are in a completely different ball game to us, completely different niche, maybe have unfair advantages that you don't have access to. And yet we're there making ourselves feel rubbish because our life doesn't replicate what they have. Palermo for us is a very special place, and we've returned twice since moving. And I feel like we have retained the love for that city because we no longer live there, because we are no longer stuck in the struggle, which we were in for 2.5 years. And so being able to recognize that it can still work for my boyfriend's family and his friends and our joint friends, but it doesn't have to work for us is a really, really important thing. And when you're here navigating your life in Italy, or you are planning to move here, you have to remember that not everything that everybody goes through is necessarily going to happen to you, but also what works for one person may not work for you. And that's why you have to lean into yourself and really into the fifth lesson that I've learned here, in that you have to listen to your inner voice and inner instinct and intuition, essentially. Because I think when you decide to move, a lot of it is based on practicality. And I think for us, we had that aspect, absolutely, because we needed to move somewhere where my boyfriend could work and actually earn an income. But then there was also an intuitive aspect to it too, because when we started looking for properties at that time of year that we were looking, so this was like December 2024, there were not many properties available, and the ones in Salerno city were ridiculously expensive, like definitely more than we'd gotten used to paying in Palermo for the past 2.5 years. And so we had to extend our search out into the province, and we found a home, but it was probably the only home that we both liked and that was suitable with Tina, our dog. And we came and viewed that property in January of 2025. And it was the only property that we flew over from Palermo to view. And I was super anxious because I was like, we've put all our eggs in one basket. If this home isn't right, if the landlord doesn't like us, if we don't get it, what are we going to do? But my boyfriend was just like, I just know we're going to get this place. And he was so sure. And he's not really that kind of person normally. Like, I'm normally the person that leans in, listens to my instinct. But he was certain. He was just like, that home is going to be ours. And, we had a few little things that we had to navigate at the beginning because the landlord was kind of very anxious, wanted to have a lot of security deposits, didn't know us. This was the first time that we'd really, really found somewhere completely cold without any existing connections here. And so when we did eventually get that home, I realized that listening to your intuition is the most important thing. Like, he didn't even have a doubt that we would get this home. Even though we had to jump a few hoops to arrive at the point where we could say it was ours, we made it and we proved ourselves in the best possible way. And so as much as practicality plays a huge part in it, so does listening to your intuition. You know instinctively where in Italy is the best place for you to live, where you feel called to in Italy, the kinds of things you want to do here and the reason why you're living here. And it may not make sense practically on a piece of paper, but the important thing is it makes sense within yourself and that you are sure about what you're doing. Because I promise you that inner instinct is actually pulling you exactly where you're meant to go. And this is why it's always really, really important leading into the next lesson that you self-validate what it is that you're doing. When we decided that we were going to leave Palermo, we didn't invite anybody into the conversation. We made the decision alone ourselves before we started sharing it with other people, because we knew that the life we were living was ours. Nobody else was experiencing what we were experiencing. And so inviting other people's opinions into the mix would have complicated things, because of course his friends and family would have wanted us to stay, but we had to be sure of our decision for ourselves, because essentially nobody else lives your life but you. And so if you are basing your decision on what other people are saying to you, you are living half a life for one, but you're also probably not making the best decision for you and your circumstances. And so when we were really, really sure about what it is that we wanted to do, and we had self-validated that decision, that is when we told other people. And, for the most part, people were really, really happy for us. Of course, sad as well, yes, because they didn't want to see us go, but people were happy. And even though some people might have been quite sad, they came round in the end because they realised it was the best thing for us. And so it's this. Self-validate always, because the problem is when you invite other people's opinions, into your life, you are also taking on that person's own beliefs and values and what they think is possible for themselves. And sometimes that could be very, very different to how you view your life and the possibilities that you view for yourself. And so that's why I think you have to be sure within yourself before you start turning to other people. Gaining the advice of other people, listening to other people is a really valuable thing to do. I don't think that you should shut yourself off in a bubble when it comes to moving to Italy and not lean into what anybody else has to say. But you have to be more confident within yourself first before you turn to others, because if people have had negative experiences, if people say something that contradicts how you feel about something, you want to have the clarity within yourself that you're doing the right thing and that was just that person's experience and it can happen, but it's not necessarily going to be your own. And so that only comes once you've self-validated your decision ultimately for yourself. I guess this brings us nicely to the final lesson that I've learned in the past 12 months, in that things in your head are a lot bigger than how they actually turn out in reality. I was filled with a little bit of anxiety about this move because I knew that this would be the first time in my entire life that I would be so-called smart working, or working from home, in other words. And that brought about a lot of anxiety because it was a way of working that I'd never experienced before. But also I got stressed thinking, what if the internet isn't very good? Or what if Tina doesn't settle well when I'm doing lessons and she's really noisy in the background? But life has a funny way of showing you that sometimes what is in our heads is so much worse than what actually pans out in reality. Because I've been smart working now for nearly a year. And honestly, although it took a bit of getting used to at the start, and some days I'm a bit like, I miss interactions with people, for the majority of times, I am very, very happy that I work in this way. And it works for me and the things that I'm doing in my life at this time to have this kind of working mode. I will say that Tina has gotten into her own routine, so I needn't have worried about that at all. And as for the internet, it's been pretty good, I have to be honest with you. A couple of days where it was a bit so-so in a whole year, right? So I was worried and stressed and anxious for no reason. And this is the thing. You can have worries and anxiety and stress about something like moving to Italy, setting up your life here, absolutely. But you've got to get those thoughts out of your head and onto paper. And then you've got to be able to critically assess those thoughts from an objective point of view and understand if you are just making a mountain out of a molehill, or if there is something that's genuinely worth concerning yourself about. Because essentially, if I had allowed myself to get super stressed about this whole aspect, I might not have moved, because I might have considered it too risky to jeopardize my work, which was the only stable work we had at that time, for a move that may not blend very well with our life and may mean that I'm no longer able to do what I do. So I just think that you have to objectively look at the thoughts in your head, and if necessary, speak to other people about them, get some clarity, get some outsider perspective. But essentially, what's in our heads is always bigger than what actually turns out to be reality. And I think, honestly, hand on heart, looking back over the past 12 months, I honestly think this move was one of the best things we've ever done. And it's a definitive moment for me because I appreciate the Salerno province so much more than I did before, because I've had that time to contrast it with. But also I realized that this is really where I feel like home and I feel comfortable here. And I never really got to that point in Palermo. I think not because it was Palermo's fault as a city, because it's an incredibly beautiful place, but I just think because we were never at a point of feeling totally relaxed the entire time that we lived there. And so to be back somewhere where I feel relaxed, I feel different within myself. I look different. Like 1 year later, not just for the change in hair color, but just for the fact that I'm not wearing all that stress that I wore for 2.5 years. I feel like it was one of the best things I could have done. And it's taught me so much. And in turn, I feel like I can help others who are in a similar situation or are planning a move here. So I guess I want to wrap this video up by saying, don't ever be afraid of the uncomfortable moments in your life, because somewhere deep within them, they're full of the best lessons you could ever possibly learn. If you've enjoyed this video, this is the one I think you should watch next, and I will see you in the next video.